As many of you are probably aware, Paris, France was attacked by terrorists just a few days ago. The Kentucky Standard's Trey Crumby had a Skype interview with a journalist from Bardstown now living in Paris. Here is his extended interview with journalist Michael Kirtley.
I guess before we begin, can you just give us a little background about yourself? I understand that you're a Bardstown native, but why exactly are you in Paris?
Well, I'm a Bardstown native, very proud Kentuckian. Go Big Blue, I've lived a lot of my life overseas. I lived my childhood and youth in Bardstown, and I came back and lived there at different other occasions over the course of my lifetime. But you'd have to say that I've spent a lot of my time living overseas, partly in Europe, and when I'm in Europe, I live in France, and partly in Africa. Africa has been the continent where I've probably stayed the most during that time. So I'm in Paris because I love Paris. and it's a nice place to be in to think globally in a way. But I still have lots of affection for my friends, family, and places in Bardstown.
All right. So, where exactly were you in Paris when the attacks happened?
Okay, I live in my apartment that you see in the picture here, and my apartment's in the center of Paris. Basically, it's very centrally located, and where the attacks took place are a little bit to the northeast of me, about 1.5 miles as the crow flies. I mean, you don't really think about it as the same exact neighborhood, but still, it's not that far away. Mm-hmm. I could probably walk there in 40 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, easily, you know. So it's, I mean, Paris is not a very big city. You know, the inside of Paris is not a very big city. And so nothing is really, you can walk across Paris in 3 hours. So so it feels, when I say it's 1.5 miles, it feels close, but it does feel close to me too, because it's really not that far away, but it still isn't my neighborhood.
Right.
And it was Friday night. I had just gone out and done a few things and then come back in, and I turned on the television and was watching the news, and immediately I saw what had happened. So obviously it was very shocking. It was very shocking to me personally because I've seen lots of terrorist attacks take place in Paris over the time that I've been involved with Paris, and that means over the past 40 some odd years. But there's never been anything like this, nothing remotely comparable to this. So my first reaction was, as with most people, I presume, a kind of disbelief, because I heard about, first of all, I heard about this cafe that had been shot up. And at that time, nobody was saying exactly what the relationship was with the shooters. So it could have been a kind of mass shooting that, you know, that occurs like in America. At first, was my first reaction. What is it? But then when you saw that it was, that they went to another place, and then you found out that there had been a bomb go off at the stadium outside of Paris. And then we found out that this concert hall had been taken over and people were taken hostage inside of it. Then it was very easy to see that it was terrorism. It was very easy to understand that, because it has a signature of simultaneous events taking place over a very short period of time, and then lots of casualties. So my reaction then became one of, obviously, concern if I had any friends there. Number two, sadness for the things that had happened. And then all of a sudden I started getting lots of calls from people that were worried about me, you know, from around the world, from America, from Kentucky, from other places. And then it became like an all-night marathon for me, because as a journalist, I was very interested in following what was going on, but also I started giving interviews. There were interviews with different radio and TV networks, mainly in America, that wanted to just find out something, anything, because keeping in mind it was the middle of the night. And so it wasn't like you could go just to some local correspondent. It was not very easy to do that. And you couldn't go there. Like I couldn't go there. Paris was in lockdown at that point. At least that part of Paris was in lockdown. And I really wouldn't want to go there because you really didn't know what was going on if there was still like an active situation. So I guess during the course of the night, I started feeling just great disgust and anger, I would say, lots of anger at this situation because Paris is a beautiful city. It still is a beautiful city. That hasn't changed. But still, it felt like, I mean, to me personally, it felt like somebody had created a real dirty spot in this city that I love. And this dirty spot was littered with bodies and streamed with blood. And whereas about 10 months ago, we had this horrific event where the magazine called Charlie Hebdo was attacked, at least that fit into something anybody could understand. Maybe not accept, but at least understand. That magazine had done provocative things. They had been warned many times that there might be some sort of attack. Finally, there was an attack. So it seemed very targeted. You know, it seemed like, okay, I don't like it. It's hateful, but I understand it. This has no way there's no way that you can understand other than in the context of international war, perhaps. There's no way that you can understand that people would just go and start shooting up cafes and taking hostages inside concert halls and things like that. So that randomness of it, that sort of totally difficult part to understand, made it a lot deeper, and certainly partly because of the casualties and partly because of the nature of the attack. I think it's going to have a much stronger effect here in Paris and maybe on the world than Charlie Hebdo did.
Okay. Now, since you're in Paris, what has been like the general reaction from the general populace so far? Are they fearful? Are they scared? What's going on there?
Of course they're fearful. Today, what I noticed is that the first day, yesterday, which would have been the first day after the event, people would go out, but not a lot. My son lives in Paris, and by the way, for all his friends, he's perfectly safe. And he called me and he asked me if I thought it was safe to go out. And I told him I didn't think it was unsafe. I mean, why would it be especially unsafe? I mean, it's not like there's a terrorist attack every second. But I think that was the general feeling of lots of people in Paris. Is it safe for me to go out in the street? There were some people that came to the spot where the attacks had taken place, and they brought flowers and lit candles. There were lots of journalists. But generally speaking, it was very muted yesterday. Whereas today, there's been kind of an opposite reaction. People feel that they need to go there. They need to actually understand what took place. And so there's kind of a defiant attitude. There's kind of saying, well, you know, I'm not going to be afraid. So today, in the areas where these attacks took place, and especially in a central plaza that's not too far away from there called the Place de la République, you've seen lots of people show up and sort of commune together, talk to each other, and basically grieve together. But I think that in general terms, people are going to be afraid in the following sense. I mean, even after Charlie Hebdo, people, for about a week at least, they wouldn't go out very much. People wouldn't go into shops. They wouldn't go into cafes nearly as much as before. But they got over it. They sort of reasoned with themselves, we're not a magazine doing something that's provocative, so they're probably not going to attack us. So the French have a way of getting over these things relatively quickly. Which is, I think, to their credit. You know, they don't mull on things. They don't think about these things for a long time. They just sort of assume that life is going to get better. So this attack, this series of attacks, I think is going to have a much different effect. First of all, because it was so random, and secondly, because it took place after all of a whole set of security measures had been put into place. People probably felt safer because of those. And when you say that you've got 8 people that came in, 8 terrorists that come in with Kalashnikov submachine guns and start blowing up things and shooting all over the place, and somehow that went under the radar and nobody really saw it coming. I think that makes things a lot scarier. In addition to the fact that they had so much impact, as many as I think up to 140 people were killed. So I think that today people are going to be a lot more leery. It's also the second attack, the second big attack. So Charlie Hebdo was a kind of, people could look on it as sort of a incident. Now you have to say that there are probably going to be more terrorist attacks. People have to tell themselves that. They will tell themselves that. So once you start thinking about life that way, then you get nervous. That doesn't mean that anybody, I don't think it's especially dangerous to be in Paris, because the chances of getting caught in a terrorist attack are very small, even this terrorist attack. But still, there's a psychosis. It can happen anywhere now, And so I imagine it's going to take a little while. I imagine that the Christmas season is going to be greatly damaged here. Probably Amazon.com is going to do a lot more business than they would have done, because people are going to be using internet a lot more than they would have. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that cafes, restaurants, places like that are going to suffer for a while. And then if there's no terrorist attack for another month or so, probably things will start getting back to normal. That's my prediction.
Okay. Do you foresee, as far as long term, going into the future, do you foresee France changing any of its security protocols for how they handle public everyday life, or do you think that it'll continue on as normal?
I think that in the longer term, there's been this discussion in France about creating a kind of a Patriot Act, something similar to the Patriot Act. They've always kind of pushed it away because they say that what they need to do most of all is enforce the laws that they already have. But I have a feeling there's going to be a push for something more. And there's also going to be definitely a push for what they're already talking about, revenge. We want to attack ISIS more effectively. I'm not sure that France has the power to do that without a coalition, but there's definitely that call for revenge. And they had a series of attacks this morning, actually, over there. Inside France itself, they already have lots of security measures in place. Probably what will happen are things that are behind the scenes. For the next couple of weeks, I'm sure we're going to see a big police presence just to reassure people. Mm-hmm. Not that police presence wasn't there before, but it's going to be much more visible. They'll probably try to figure out new intelligence gathering techniques, and especially in the communities that they feel are, where these kind of terrorists develop, because you probably know that I think it was at least 6 of the 8 terrorists were French. They came from France. They were young kids. I think one of them was as young as 15 even, that they grew up as first or second generation immigrants mainly out of North Africa. That's what it seems like today. There's nothing that's been declared that way, but it seems that way. So I'm sure that those places that they feel might develop that kind of homegrown terrorists are definitely going to be under much more surveillance. And there may be laws that say if they find people that are radicalized, to either put them in under deep surveillance faster, or maybe even in jail faster, depending on the kind of speech that they have. I mean, there certainly is a hate speech law here, and the French take that pretty seriously. But my guess is that there's going to be a lot of change, but most of that change will be behind the scenes.
Okay, all right. Do you feel that maybe that there might be some sort of counterattack, or not counterattack, but a backlash against those who might be of the Muslim faith or part of the Muslim community in France as a result of this?
I'm sure there will. I mean, there was after Charlie Hebdo. It's so unfortunate because by responding with vengeance against people who are innocent, basically, I mean, it wasn't probably those Muslims that people might be attacking didn't have anything to do with these attacks. That's just going to create more division and more hatred, and therefore more likelihood that some of those people might turn more towards radicalization. In other words, it doesn't make any sense to have that kind of backlash. However, I think that you're going to see it on two levels. The first is there will be definitely, and there already was, even last night, there was a place in northern France that was attacked. They burned down an entire refugee camp. Somebody did. And so you're going to see, there's definitely mosques are going to be targeted by certain people. Probably there will be attacks on certain people in the streets. And also you will see the rise of the far right, you know, the extremists in the French population. There's already a very strong group called the National Front, which is kind of like the Tea Party, let's say, in America, and very anti-immigration, very nationalist, some people say very chauvinistic. I wouldn't be surprised if they gain lots of ground over the next few months. And the presidential election is coming up in about a year and a half, so they will. It's possible. I mean, it's not. If there's another, let's say that after this, if there's no other terrorist attack for a while, probably the support for the National Front will go down a little bit. But if there happened to be another terrorist attack, it's not impossible that there would be the candidate from the National Front that could be elected president, which would be extremely unfortunate. But it could happen. Things are changing. I mean, things are it's very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen. But you definitely feel that racism is going to rise.
All right. Now, you yourself being a journalist, this is obviously not an everyday event. So, how have you, as a journalist, covered this event as it's ongoing?
Well, mainly I've gone out and I've gone to the area where there was the attack. I've given quite a few interviews to people. I've got lots of. I mean, I had another part of my life before this attack took place. So I'm working on a film. I'm producing a film in Africa, directing a film. I'm sorry, in Africa. I'm working on other projects. So I took this seriously, and I'm going to be going on. I'm going to be doing commentary on French TV beginning tomorrow. But I've given lots of commentary to different television networks and radio outlets in America. In fact, I'm doing an hour-long interview on an international broadcast that goes to 1 million people in about 2 hours.
Wow.
That's out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And so I've kept busy, but I haven't tried to report on this specifically because there's so many people reporting on it that, you know, they're in a much better position than I am at this point. But I am able to sit back and analyze it and talk to people and go to my sources and different things like that and give kind of an analysis of all this. And that's what I do.
Okay. Now you personally, since the attacks, what have you been doing? Have you been continuing on as normal, or have you changed any of your daily routines or anything like that?
Frankly, I would never change any of my routine because of a terrorist attack. Terrorist attacks, even Charlie Hebdo, all of those are so unpredictable. You know, I mean, so why change things? I mean, if you change things, first of all, it seems to me that if you change your life because of a terrorist attack, which by its very nature is unpredictable, then that means you're giving in to what the terrorists want you to do. They're trying to divide you. They're trying to make you feel terrorized. Well, why would I allow them to do that to me? Why would I allow them to change me? They can certainly change the lives of the people that they directly attack, and they change the life of others because many people react with fear. But I don't react with fear. I don't feel afraid. Maybe there was a period of about 10 minutes where I said, you know, sort of just said, what does this mean for me, for my friends, things like that. But I don't feel more afraid today, and I say this very sincerely, than I felt 3 days ago. For a number of reasons. First of all, because I definitely don't want to feel afraid. But secondly, and more importantly, is I don't believe there's any reason to feel afraid. I mean, if you reason in the following way, that you can't predict when this is going to happen, then that means if you're afraid, you're going to be paranoid all the time. You know? So, and the chances of anybody getting actually caught up in a terrorist attack are so minimal for any one person to get caught up in a terrorist attack that being afraid would seem irrational. You know, for example, you know that you could die if you get to a car accident, but that doesn't mean you're not going to drive your car. You know, so to me that's very similar. And I know that a lot of people don't think that way, that somehow they see such things differently. But I think that we're in a world today where bad things happen. And in America, you've got these mass shootings. You know, that's kind of like a terrorist attack. How can you can't predict them. You don't know when somebody's going to go crazy and start shooting a bunch of people. Are you going to change your life because of that? And to me, it's the same thing here. I mean, I compare what happened yesterday, Friday, to some mass terrorist attack. Now, obviously, if there was a kind of an ongoing war that was taking place and we were seeing terrorist attacks every month or every couple of weeks or something, I might think differently. But at this point, I see no reason to feel afraid of anything. I'm afraid for the future of our world, yes. I'm afraid that if we don't start thinking straight about how to deal with these problems, then the problems are going to get worse. I am afraid of that. But I'm not afraid for my own personal existence.
All right. Do you have any final comments or thoughts you wish to add?
Yes, yeah. Well, first of all, for the people of Bardstown that know me, I think that many people have heard of me in Bardstown, and many people know me. I want to let them know that I am not only safe but defiant and not afraid. I want them to know that Paris is still an absolutely amazing city. There's nothing that's changed about Paris to make it less attractive. There is no reason to feel afraid if they want to come visit Paris. Not at all. In fact, probably they'll find Paris more welcoming now, because I think there's a feeling that, and I saw this after Charlie Hebdo, people want to reach out to others. I think when you go through a trauma, you feel good when you're around people who come to share your existence. Because I'm sure there are lots of Parisians tonight who are feeling that maybe there's some sort of black mark on their city. And so if you come here, you'll feel very welcome. So I think that's an important message to give. Also, I think that I'd like to encourage the people of Bardstown and Kentucky to be careful about jumping to conclusions, and especially be careful about feeling hatred. Hatred is what fuels this. Hatred is what fuels the attack by the terrorists. It's also what fuels the desire for revenge. And in both cases, it's totally non-productive. you're going to hear a lot of things over the next few weeks. For example, you're going to hear that at least one or maybe more of the terrorists came in under the guise of being migrants. To me, if that's the case, that means that it's a problem that needs to be solved. That means there needs to be better controls. Okay, that doesn't mean that suddenly the migrant problem is going to be solved just because we close all the borders of Europe. That's not going to solve the problem, because they'll still keep coming because they're running away. They're fearful for their lives. They're hungry. They're desperate. They're going to try to get in any way they can, and they will eventually succeed, or they will die at sea. And if they start dying at sea, then the consciousness of the world will be at stake. So I think you have to be there's a message there in saying, don't jump to conclusions about what this all means. And number two, don't jump to the conclusion that this necessarily means that there's going to be more terrorist attacks in America. There probably will be a terrorist attack in America at some point. I mean, the law of averages said that there will. But that doesn't mean that we can predict it, nor does that mean we should change our lives because of it. That's my message.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Michael. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Well, pleasure meeting you too. I hope this was what you wanted or what you needed.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me, and stay safe.
Okay, you're welcome. Good night.
Night.
Bye-bye.